makes you think and it makes you talk and gets the ball rolling. It's a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, the West Memphis 3 is something I mentioned earlier, and that's a case about which I'm really passionate. And there was a guy the other day, I do my best every opportunity to try to talk to people who are out there listening to the record, just because I think that's something important. That's something that I really appreciate from the bands that I like. And he not necessarily took me to task, but we started talking about the case of West Memphis 3, and he was a guy who was really informed and had well-justified opinions that completely flew in the face of what my opinions and my beliefs on the case are, and that's awesome. I think that's great, because we were talking about it, and he was informed, and there's nothing else that I could ask. I'm not, he doesn't have to agree with me. He just has to know what he's talking about.
You guys were able to have a conversation. It wasn't, I've got to beat you or you've got to beat me. It was just an open dialogue, and there's just not enough of that in this country.
Absolutely, because we want so desperately to be right, and we hate so abhorrently to be wrong.
If you weren't doing music, what do you see yourself doing?
I was, when I joined the Famine, actually a 7th grade teacher. I have an English degree with a focus on secondary education from the University of North Texas, and I'm state certified to teach English language arts 7th through 12th grade. My mom was a teacher. My grandfather was a professor. My great-grandmother was a superintendent of the school district where I grew up. Education and the education field is something that runs near and dear to my heart. It's something about which I'm very, very passionate, and something that I hope dearly to return to, once the death metal thing has run its course. And if nothing else, I have some good stories for the kids.
You'll be the coolest teacher in school.
Well, it's something that I love doing, and teaching is one of those things that really quickly separates the chaff from the wheat. If you're getting into it to have nice weekends and summers off, it will break you very quickly, because you just won't have the fortitude for it. And it's something that I love doing, and it's something that's very rewarding. Being a relatively young guy in the teaching game, I definitely had, hopefully will have in the future, a lot to prove for myself. So, I might have had to be one measure more strict than everybody else, just so they didn't think that the guy with the mustache and the ponytail was letting the kids cut loose and, pumping them full of liberal indoctrination and stuff like that,
If you could sit down and spend one night with any one person, living or dead, past or present, who would it be and why?
Oh, wow. I see these questions all the time, and my immediate reaction is to just rack my brain. I have this weird thing, though, where I want to stay as far away from my heroes as possible, just because I almost fetishize them. There's a guy, his name's Blake Schwarzenbach. He used to sing for a band called Jawbreaker. After that, he sang for a band called Jets to Brazil, and those are my 2 favorite bands of all time. Then he moved to New York and started teaching as an adjunct professor at Hunter College, and then he got his master's, and I believe maybe his doctorate in something crazy like 17th century British literature, and I probably, had I the gumption, could have tracked him down. I've spent my share of time in New York City, but I actively avoided it because it would just take one errant word. The guy's a wordsmith and just a consummate intellect, and it would just take one, I would cower at his prowess. So I've avoided all interaction with him and will continue to do so. For me, I think I'm going to have to say Franklin Roosevelt. Some of his policies really changed the nature of conversation in this country, and they were radical, and some of them were very successful, and some of them were complete failures. But I think that he was a fragile and maybe inherently broken man who was able to achieve the pinnacle of success in this country, and he had to fight tooth and nail, and he made a lot of mistakes along the way, but I feel like just that era in our history kind of is what made us the greatest country in the world that we are today. I have a thing or two to learn because, I'm certainly a broken individual as well.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, exactly. So it's very inspiring to see somebody be able to rise above a situation like that and to make mistakes boldly and ultimately for the greater good.
I always loved to have gone back in time and sat down for an evening with Benjamin Franklin.
Absolutely.
Especially right now, you want to ask him, what would the forefathers have said? Were they just basically a bunch of dumb old white men trying to protect their interests, or were they really brilliant as we've given them credit for?
Oh, yeah. Well, and Jefferson's another one, but, and now there's been this, I want to use the phrase revisionist history, although it probably isn't the most fitting phrase, where it's like, well, Ben Franklin didn't really discover electricity, and he wasn't the one flying the kite with the key on it. He made his son do it because he was a huge jerk and he didn't want to die and all this kinds of stuff, you know. And then, well, Thomas Jefferson was having kids with his slaves, and, you know, he was a racist and he was a bigot and things like that. But, you know, if it weren't for those guys and what I believe to be their you know, flawed intellect and their flawed principles, just like we were talking about,
right.
Like, I want to recognize somebody as having made mistakes and still doing something great from which I can benefit today. You know, and I think that there's a lot of like fetishization of Reagan in this country still, and you know, there was this whole like the anti-Reagan movement in punk rock in the 80s that was super critical of him and stuff like that. But it's like, I mean, like Reagan is a deity to some people in this country, but I guess so are the founding fathers, just like God is. You know, we want to put quotes from God on billboards, and we want to put quotes from, you know, Timothy McVeigh when he was arrested was wearing a T-shirt with a quote from Thomas Jefferson on it. And I'd love to know what Thomas Jefferson would have thought about that.
Exactly. Well, you know, and that's the thing, and I was having this conversation the other night with somebody that we don't know what actually happened historically because history is written by the people in power.
Right.
You know, there were people who would have you believe that the Holocaust never happened, and had things been a little bit differently, the history books might read differently. I don't think anybody at this point in time believes that JFK was killed by a magic bullet. But years from now, the history book says he was shot by this magic bullet and this one lone gunman.
Yeah. So, and also, you know, 3,000 years ago, we thought that Thor was descending from the heavens with his great hammer to give us earthquakes, and Prometheus brought us fire, and you know, then a different set of white guys took power, and all of a sudden it was the Earth was created in 6 days, and it's interesting to see how quickly we abandon the past narrative in favor of the bold and the new and the fresh, especially if it supports our personal feelings on the matter.
Somebody was talking to me about religion just the other day, and about the Bible, and because much like the Constitution, it's our rote in America. The Bible is it. It's our doctrine. But I was like,
because there's a sham of a separation between church and state, which is
and I'm like,
disgusting in itself.
But how do we know realistically that the Bible wasn't just written by the Stephen King of that generation?
Well, and did they say you have to have faith? Because that's the answer that, you know, when I asked that question at every point in my youth and in my childhood, that's the answer that I got. And I said, well, what about the people who don't have faith? What are how do they fit into this picture then? If the Bible is the roadmap for our values, which I don't believe it is. I believe our morality existed a long time before the Book of James, but I guess that's an entirely different discussion.
Well, I'll give you one more question before we get out of here then.
Sounds good, man.
People are always talking about bucket lists. What would be on your bucket list? What's one or two things that you definitely want to make sure that you achieve?
I'd like to dive into a pool of water with a knife between my teeth. I'd like to flip over a table to shield myself from bullet fire. I'd like to kill a man just to watch him die. Gosh, I guess it's too late for me to be the first man on the moon. I don't know, man. Maybe it's my flaw. I live things one day at a time. I'm thankful for what I have and for every achievement that I've been able to make up to this point in my life. I definitely have my goals and my aspirations, but I think they're disgustingly rooted in my reality. I'd like to have grandkids who love me. How about that?
There you go. That's a good one to live for. Well,
yeah.
The new album, Architects of Guild, is a brilliant piece of work. Congratulations on that. And we look forward to more music from you guys, and hopefully more of the great minds you'll get a chance to mold when your music career is done.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate that.